Some scholars refer to our contemporary era as the information age, but it could just as well be called the age of disinformation. As you've probably noticed, our country and our world are struggling quite a bit right now with mass amounts of just bad information, even having to deal with deliberate disinformation campaigns from powerful groups and countries, outright propaganda, conspiracy theories are proliferating amongst the public and causing confusion and distrust. And then there's just the propensity to lie that we're seeing from the highest levels of government. And I think in the middle of a pandemic, it really puts into focus how access to good information can be a matter of life and death. And so, good information and the ability to share good information really is a public good and is central to the functioning of a good society. And so, that's what this assignment, speech number 2, is really focused on, the importance of giving good information. We live in an era where we're seeing the democratization of information. What do we mean by that? We mean that the things like the internet and social networking have really empowered individuals to be producers of information. But with that kind of spreading out of the responsibility to produce and share information among many people, we've seen a kind of diminishing of the quality of information, as well as a diminishing trust in certain experts, institutions, and ways of knowing that are perhaps better than others. And so it's a challenging time for us. And that really puts, I hope, into focus the importance of this kind of assignment. As it says over here, the goal of speech number 2 is to clearly convey quality information. So we want to be efficient in conveying or sending out or teaching information that is good, quality, credible information. In this lecture video, I'm going to talk about the Speech 2 assignment in great detail. It's a super important discussion because it will directly impact your evaluation of speech number 2, or my evaluation of your speech number 2. Before you really get started, I really want you to spend some time reading this prompt that you see over here, which appears at the very top of the modules. Here, I'll bring it up under Speech 2 assignment instructions, and that's where you can download it right here. So spend some time reading this. I'm not going to read it in detail. It goes over everything: the assignment description, the general purpose, lots of information there. Talk about the audience and the situation for this speech, the time, use of supporting materials, the arrangement of the speech, introduction, body, conclusion, how to outline your speech. Talk a little bit about what an informative style is, your note card requirements, your delivery and recording requirements, and then of course there's the whole rubric as well that you see here. So every bit of information that you need is on that prompt. I'm not going to spend time reading it to you. I'm going to instead turn to a PowerPoint slide show that will highlight some of the key differences between speech 1 and 2, and talk about some key details that I want you to know. So again, the goal is to clearly convey quality information. Here's the basic assignment description. It should be 6 to 8 minute speech. Again, we're extemporaneously delivering our speeches. That means we are relying heavily on memory. We've prepared a lot. We've rehearsed a lot. We're using note cards with brief notes on them to guide our performance, to prompt our memory. Your goal in this speech is to inform your audience. That's the general purpose. So, not trying to persuade, you're not trying to introduce yourself or entertain, you're trying to give good information. about an interesting, important, or relevant topic, and you should use one of the following two options. One of them, do not try to do both of these. Option A is a topic, a person, place, object, event, concept, or process that's somehow related to Las Vegas. So that gives you a pretty good focus there. That's still broad enough that gives you a lot of options. Option B, on the other hand, is maybe even broader. Report on a specific person, place, object, idea, event that significantly changed the world. So regardless of whether you choose option A or option B, and you should only choose one, you're going to want to try to narrow your focus down to some specific subject that you're able to cover in depth in this short amount of time, 6 to 8 minutes, and you're probably wanting to aim for a 7-minute speech consistently in rehearsal. Remember, I'm not looking at page numbers or word length, but I'm looking at the time it takes you to say your speeches. Moving on, let's talk a little bit about issues of invention. I'm not going to talk about audience analysis and audience adaptation yet. That's an error in the slideshow. But when considering invention, right, gathering, deciding what you're going to talk about, the purpose, of course, is to inform your audience, and that should guide your topic selection here. We're going to teach our audiences about something that's new, relevant, or interesting. Topic selection should always start with yourself and your own interests. If you're not interested in it, we won't be either. So when you're brainstorming, think about, what are you curious about? What wouldn't you mind spending some time working with here for the next few weeks? Do yourself and the audience a favor and pick something that you're excited about. Then consider the audience. Is this something that will be new to the audience? Something that would be relevant to the audience, or something that the audience will consider interesting or important? Think about your audience for this speech, and check out on the prompt where I tell you again about what the imagined situation is for this speech. You're speaking in front of either a group of 20, this is imagined again, 20 of your coworkers or classmates, and you have been asked to go research a topic and then report back on it. So keep in mind that you'll be speaking to an audience of your peers, audience of your peers that is pretty diverse, and adapt your message to that audience. You're going to, once you've selected your topic, you want to funnel that topic, what the textbook refers to as funneling, down to something very narrow and specific, and we might think of moving from topic to thesis statement. And remember that thesis statement is a concise, declarative statement that expresses the main idea of the speech. It doesn't announce your intention to talk about the main idea later. I'm going to talk about something later on. It states the main idea directly as is. We'll talk more about this in just a second. For your invention process, you need to consult outside source material. You need to do some research. You cannot and should not rely solely on your own experience and knowledge. Can your own experience and knowledge inform the speech? Certainly, but you need to back up the things you're saying with evidence, and evidence that is reputable. So it should be outside, not you, and it should be reputable given your topic, right? So it's going to depend on what you're talking about, but if you're using the CSN library, and there's going to be some resources in later modules on how to do that, you're most likely to produce and find good results. You want to look for websites, articles, essays, journal publications, books, radio interviews, documentaries. These are the kinds of sources that you'll be looking for. You need to find, use, and that means actually put information from those sources into your speeches, and then cite. Tell us when you're using those sources, what those sources are as you're using those sources. There's going to be a discussion board coming up that will help you develop ideas for your topic, and as well as there'll be some resource pages on researching. As you're doing your research, it's always a good idea to maybe consider keeping what I call or what is called a preliminary bibliography. And what you do with a preliminary bibliography is once you find a source that you want to read, you create a works cited citation for that source, perhaps on a Word document, and then below that citation, you could take notes from that source. What I generally like to do when I'm taking notes from a source is I like to copy paste quotes that I think are interesting or good quotes that I might use in my speech. Of course, I'm very careful to indicate that these are quotes so that I don't end up plagiarizing, and I include page numbers so that I'm able to do in-text citations. But I copy paste quotes. I try to summarize the article in my own words. In other words, I paraphrase. And remember, when you're paraphrasing in your speeches from a source, you still need to both orally cite your source and have in-text citations. In addition to summarizing and copy-pasting quotes, another thing that I do on my preliminary bibliography is I try to leave myself a note about how this source might be useful for me during my speech. So it might say something like, this source contains a really interesting story that would work well for the attention getter of my speech. So I try to leave myself notes. This allows me, when I'm sitting down to write my speech later on, to not have to go back and reread my sources, but to be able to consult my preliminary bibliography, draw information directly from that, and save myself quite a bit of time. As you're working on gathering sources for your speeches and crafting your speech, remember that you have ethical commitments to honesty, accuracy, goodwill, right? We want the best outcome for the world, for our audiences. Citation, giving credit where credit is due. Originality, we want to use our own words when we're not citing and not quoting. We want to make sure our audiences can distinguish between information that's drawn from a source versus my own thoughts or my own words. As you are crafting your informative speeches, remember this is not a persuasive speech. So you should avoid advocacy in the sense of advocating for a particular course of action. Of course, as the textbook reminds us, you're advocating for certain ideas. You're saying these ideas are quality, good ideas that you can believe to be true. So you're advocating for good ideas, but you're not advocating for a course of action. You're not trying to solve a problem. You're not trying to change behavior. You're not trying to make an argument. You're not trying to motivate the audience to some course of action. Generally, avoid persuasion in the traditional sense here. Instead, you should be reporting, teaching, offering a brief, like if you were on a job and your boss asked you to go research something and then come brief him or her. And lastly, you're trying to inform. Okay, moving on to arrangement. How should the speech be organized? This is important because this is one of the main differences or main changes from speech 1 to speech 2. I'm adding more things to the introduction than in speech number 1. There's now 5 things, and that these 5 things will appear in both speech 2 and in speech 3. Attention getter you're aware of. Thesis statement you should also be aware of. There'll be another thesis statement assignment, and we'll go through another process of revisions just like we did last time. Make sure you read the instructions on that thesis statement assignment very closely, and hopefully we can all come up with great thesis statements that get approved well before our speech is set to be recorded. Here's something new in the introduction, what I'm calling the audience orientation. What the audience orientation, the textbook calls relevance, right? Establishing the relevance of your speech for the audience. How I want you to conceive of the audience orientation is that it is about giving the audience something that they'll be able to do with the speech, right? What will they gain? What kind of actions will they be able to take after listening to your speech? Following this speech, you will be able to more confidentially, excuse me, that should say confidently. Following this speech, you will be able to more confidently participate in local elections. And so what we're doing there is not simply saying you're going to be more informed about local elections. Of course you will. Go further. Tell us what we'll be able to do. So that's a good audience orientation. That's what I'll be looking for those. Your ethos statement will be a statement that tells your audience a little bit about the research you've done. What's the best research you've done? Why are you credible? What have you done to prepare for this speech? In preparation for this speech, I've consulted multiple academic journal articles from leading journals, including the journal Nature. Okay, so I just named my best research. Is there more research in my speech? Yes. But right now, I'm just trying to get in your mind that I've done some preparation. And if you have special personal experience, meaning it goes beyond just the common personal experience a common person might have towards something like direct knowledge or expertise, then you want to mention that as well in your ethos statement. I was trained in my job as a chef in proper health procedures for the preparation of food. Okay, so if you're talking about food preparation, and that would be a good thing to mention. You were certified. You were a chef. You were trained specifically in this. So that's good personal experience. Here's like a bad version of that. You're giving your speech on the invention of smartphones. And you say, I've had a smartphone now for 6 years. Okay, well, guess what? So has almost everybody in your audience, right? That doesn't give you any special information about the invention of smartphones. So personal experience that's pretty common and not going to really inform your credibility, not worth mentioning. Last thing you want to do in your introduction is you're going to preview your main points. And this is very important. Some of you wrote your thesis statements like they were previews. Today I'm going to talk about topic 1, topic 2, topic 3. Rather than writing your thesis statements that way, that's how I want you to write your preview statement. You should name very clearly and in the order that you will cover them in the body the main points of your speech. For speech number 2, there will either be 2, 3, or 4 main points. Name them each specifically. I will begin talking first about my childhood, then I'll talk about my teenage years, and lastly, I'll talk about my adulthood. Okay, so that just very clearly gives the audience a kind of preview, a map of the speech that they'll be able to use. Continuing on with arrangement, the bodies of your speech, as I mentioned, should have 2 to 4 main points. We'll have a video lecture later on about how to organize the body, how to organize the main points. They need to be logically ordered, clearly stated. They should be like little thesis statements. They're the thesis statement of that section of the speech. So write your main points very similarly to how you write your thesis statements. They should be unpacking the thesis statement, digging deeper into the thesis statement. And these are the strategies that you'll be able to use to organize them. I'm not going to go over them now. Know that it'll come in a later lecture video. The conclusion is also different this time because you'll have 3 things instead of 2. Again, you'll need to signal the end, give the audience some psychological preparation. Then, instead of just reinforcing the purpose, I want you to actually review the main points. Each of the main points of the body specifically should be reviewed and with a little more detail than you had used when you previewed them. So you've talked about them in the body. Now give us some of the salient details in your review. And then lastly, a final line that powerfully closes the speech. Practice, practice, practice that final line. I'm going to be grading transitions this time, and I expect to see transitions throughout the speech. I'll show you again this when we go over outlining later. But the transitions should come after the preview, before the first main point. So coming out of the introduction into the body, there should be a transition. And there should be a transition between each of the main points of the body. And then lastly, there should be a transition coming out of the body into the conclusion. So that if you have 2 main points, that means you have 3 total transitions in your speech. If you have 4 main points, you have 5 total transitions in your speech. There's going to be a video on transitions. Outlining, there's going to be a video on outlining, but just know you are expected to craft and base your speech upon a full sentence, full content outline that you will submit the Monday before the videos are due on the following Sunday. I will talk about this in greater detail. You'll read about it in the textbook. Style. Consider an informative style of speaking. When you're editing your speeches for word choice, think about how can I make this clearer to my audiences? There's a video lecture all about this that's coming up very soon. In addition to the informative style, you need to consider your style of citations. One, you're going to have to do written in-text citations when you are writing your outline. An in-text citation looks a bit like this right here. It has the author's last name, space, and then the page number, if there's page numbers. I will talk more about this, give you more information about written citations for your outlines later on, but just know that those exist and you'll be expected to do them for this speech. You're also going to be expected to perform what are called oral citations, spoken citations. Remember, you have 3 credible sources that you need to use. So that means if you're using each of them at least 1 time, that means you're naming them as you're using them all at least 1 time. Now, I expect more than that most likely for well-developed speeches, but that's the minimum. At minimum, you need to tell us who's the person or organization, or who's the author or creator of whatever source you're citing. Where did you find this? Where is this information contained? Was it on a web page? Was it a article from a newspaper, an article from a magazine? Was it an interview on the radio? Right? Where was this information housed or contained? And then when was that information created? When was that source published? When was the web page last updated? Or if you don't have that information, when was the last time that you went and looked at that web page? Tell us when for your sources. And that's when you're giving a quote, or if you're paraphrasing, just mentioning information that you got from a source, you need to cite it every time, multiple times. So 1 citation at the beginning, not enough. You need to cite each and every time you're using information from a source. That likely means you're going to be citing a single source multiple times. When you're citing a single source multiple times, I'll go over this at a later video. The first citation should be complete, telling us who, where, and when, and then from there you can go on and say, Dr. Hassert continues, or the New York Times also states, or the CDC website claims, in addition to this, that XYZ thing is true. So you can use quick citations to keep the source visible to your audience. We want to make our sources present to our audiences for their own information as well as for our own credibility. So that deals with style. When you're developing your memory, we're talking about beginning to rehearse. Remember that we're doing extemporaneous delivery, so you're going to rely on a lot of memory here. Rather than 2 note cards This time you can use 4 note cards. You can use the front and back. I don't recommend that you try to use all 8 surfaces. That can get a little cumbersome, but you have that flexibility. 4 3x5-inch note cards. They're stiff like a note card, and you can use all 8 surfaces. I'm going to provide you with a note card template that you can use to create a Word document that will have legible, clear print and will meet the requirements as described on the rubric. On the assignment rubric, I talk about what the note card requirements are. If you're using the note card template, you'll print out a Word document with your notes on them, you'll cut it, and you'll glue it or tape it to your note card. That's the ideal way to craft your note cards for this speech. You may handwrite your note cards since campus is closed. Practice, 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 practice. You'll turn your outlines in on Monday, and you'll have about 5 days until Sunday to rehearse. That's a lot of time to really develop that memory, gain comfort with your text so that you can be confident. If you're not confident, we're not going to trust the information you're giving us. Delivery, very same delivery requirements as speech number 1. Check out the rubric for more details about this. I hope this video was helpful. Remember, all the information you need is on this prompt right here. So go ahead and get it, take a look, and best of luck constructing speech number 2. If you have questions, take them to the Common Core question board. Thank you.